Welcome to another video. This one is going to be about teams or amateur teams that probably doesn't have a coach, that struggle with designing strategies or making decisions for tactics and so on. And it's mostly about the planning phase, basically, when you sit in a custom lobby and you go through verbally basically on what you want to do, and then you test it in scrims. So let's imagine that we're in an amateur team and we've tried to think about strategies, and then we realize that it's a bit difficult to organize our thoughts or formulate ourselves, basically. It can be, the feeling of it is basically that it can feel difficult to remember or keeping track of interactions between heroes, too many scenarios to think of, or that it's just hard to remember it in general. Maybe you say, not that we talk too much, but it's very dense information, if that makes sense, and it might be hard to remember without having to repeat it. For an example, I can't remember everything I say just by saying it once. So when I talk about strategy, I mean macro. I'm talking about the macro. It's the heroes. It's the archetype for the setup, basically. It's what type of heroes you want to use. Do you want to use mobility like dive, or do you want to use defensive and passive, or like tanks? And it's also what objectives they have. For example, what goals, like greater goals. And then when we talk about tactics, it's about the way you get to the goal. It's the way you reach the goals, basically. For example, the positioning, the ability combos, the ultimate combos, etc. So imagine that you're sitting, as I said, in a custom lobby. You talk through a strat and you realize that, or, well, you don't realize, but let's say that we decide it's pretty good. We're gonna test it in scrims, and the way teams have done it so far, or like amateur teams done it so far, is that once it's tested in scrims, if it's shattered, if it's like stumped, then it's automatically scrapped. Because a bad experience, like where you literally can't do anything, you're basically not playing the game, that kind of stumped, causes a lot of players to feel it's a waste of time to keep practicing the strategy, and sometimes it isn't. But when it's not stumped, like when you lose, but it might be close, or it might be that you win one map out of 3 in a COF or whatever, then it's just tweaked a bit, and then you test again. And if it's stomping the enemy, usually it's very small tweaks, fixing obvious mistakes, or sometimes it's no tweaks at all. And it's a bad thing as well, because you get in the habit of, okay, this works, let's not work anymore. And there's no use in stopping the work once you have something rolling, because you want to optimize, you want to snowball, etc. So it doesn't take much to realize that it's a slow process for developing strategies, viable strategies, as an amateur team. So one of the ways you can cut corners in terms of the planning phase, but where you put a lot of time in and it's boring, it's pretty slow, someone might not even listen. It's for example, when you sit in a lobby and someone explains and shows at the same time, usually it's one person and then everyone else spectates. The way you can make it more effective is by having a teammate write down what's happening, and someone else may be recording. Who the guy who's showing it might record, and then you have someone else typing what's being said. And you have to make sure that when when you go through the strats and you have someone typing, you want to give them time as well to finish up typing. So you just make sure, is everything going along, like, or do you need some more time? And if it's okay, then you move on. Simple as that. But the reason for doing this is because when you write something, you basically put the way you think on paper, because the way we think is by speaking, and when we write something, it's going to be obvious when you read it out loud how you were thinking. And it's much easier to see the fault in logic or the fault in organizing the thoughts, or you might even see where you fell short on when it came to the planning. Maybe you didn't think about a certain type of counter, or maybe you were having too much fun and trying to be too creative. And the problem with being too creative, as an example, is that it's not the ideas themselves that are bad, it's the implementation of the idea. It's, for example, more common that very creative ideas fail in the phase where they are implemented. For example, when you practice them or when you develop a tactic for them, because they might be too advanced, or they might be too hard to execute with optimal effort, or not effort but optimal conditions. So for example, also if the team makes sudden changes in the decisions, let's say that the team decides to scrap 3 heroes for some reason, then you note that down as well. And you don't go back and edit in the text, you write down the change you made. If you decide that it's time to scrap the map, then you write that down as well. And the document basically isn't meant to be something that you hand in to someone. You're not supposed to make it an assignment. It's more to help yourself. It's the same as taking notes of a VOD, basically. So if you get stuck with the team, let's say that we have no idea how to solve Anubi's second point defense or attack. Well, how do we fix that? Well, we can take 5 minutes or 10 minutes break, take some air, take some water, drink some water, and then you go through together with everyone what was written, and you read it out loud from start to finish, and you'll start to notice exactly how you were thinking as a team, not as a person, because usually more than one person is talking when deciding the strategies and such. But you might not have been aware of how you were talking, or the tone, or the choice of words, or the amount of information that is subconscious, that you process without thinking. Basically, if we say that, yeah, I'm gonna play Widow on Gibraltar, it's pretty obvious to me already how Widow should be played. But for someone else, it might not be. And that's an important factor to be aware of when designing strategies and tactics with your team. So, yeah, you notice that if the structure or the organizing of the thoughts, ideas, and words basically is wrong, or it's really hard to follow, if you notice that, it's very obvious, because you can't really fool yourself when you realize it. You get a certain feeling of, yeah, I shouldn't have done it like that, because I know I can do better. And once you've gone through the whole text, you try again. You go back to where you think there was problems. For example, if we notice that we gave too little information on how to play Widow on Gibraltar, and it feels like it's a weak point, then we go back there, we try to fill out the information. If it's still a weak point, because we might not be good at Widow, and the opponent might be better at Widow, then we can simply swap out Widow, and we go for a different counter. And yeah, it's just a trial and error phase, and this isn't any major method or something to bring up your own strategies. It's just a small tool you can add to how you already do something and make it more consistent, make it easier to develop yourself.